Okay, hello Bio. We're going to finish chapter 4 today, and we're going to learn about some more aquatic ecosystems. So again, where living things live inside of the water. So our first area that we're a new term is called an estuary. So this is another ecosystem found in the water. So these are wetlands that are formed where the river meets the sea. So then therefore it's going to contain a mixture of fresh and salt water, and they're also affected by the ocean tide. So estuaries are really interesting areas that kind of have a lot of different life in them because they kind of have a mix of fresh and salty water. And then there are the primary producers that are found in these estuaries include plants, algae, and bacteria. So those are the three main producers, and again, they're all found in these estuary areas. And in the estuary food web, the most of the primary production is not consumed by herbivores. Instead, much of the organic material will enter the food web as detritus. And as a reminder, we've had this word before, but detritus is made up of tiny pieces of organic material that provide food for organisms at the base of the estuary's food web. So this is just little tiny pieces, could be of dead matter, of formerly living matter, so yeah, probably just mainly dead matter, that makes up the base of the estuary's food web. So detritus is a food source for the bottom kind of producers in the food web. And so then kind of continue on with this is that there's a thing called salt marshes, and these are going to be found in temperate zone estuaries that are dominated by salt-tolerant grasses above the low tide line and by seagrasses underwater, and they occur along seacoasts in the temperate zone. So again, salt marshes are maybe going to occur in areas where the weather is kind of warm for part of the year but also cold. So a salt marsh is another area that kind of goes along with estuaries. Our next are mangrove swamps, and these are going to be coastal wetlands that occur in bays and estuaries across the tropical regions, including southern Florida and Hawaii. And then the dominant plants are going to be salt-tolerant trees called mangroves, with seagrasses common below the low tide line. So these are kind of a nice transition from what we talked about in our last video with the freshwater ecosystems to now what we're going to talk about now, which is our marine ecosystems. And so marine is going to be strictly ocean and salt water, and the ones that we just talked about with the mangrove swamps and the salt marshes and the estuaries are kind of a mixture between fresh and salt, to where now this is strictly salt. And so the first important word you're going to need to know is the photic zone. And remember, photics kind of sounds like photosynthesis, so that photic is going to have to deal with light. And so this is going to be the well-lit upper layer of the ocean. And so there's going to be algae and other producers can grow only in this thin surface layer. So algae can't really grow much farther down than this. And then below the photic zone, we have what's called the aphotic zone. So remember, when we see A, that always means without. So that's going to be without light. And when we call something that's without light, we have the word dark. So the aphotic zone is permanently dark. And in this area, there's going to be chemosynthetic, so no photosynthesizing going on down here. Autotrophs, and they're the only producers that can survive in this region, again because there's no sunlight. And so now we're going to look at the characteristics of these two different zones. So in between our photic and aphotic, we have three other zones, and these are known as the intertidal zone, the coastal ocean, and the open ocean. So here's kind of a map of what it might look like when it's kind of just broken down. Again, the photic zone being up at the top, and then aphotic following there. And so our first zone is the intertidal zone, and the organisms that live in this zone are exposed to regular and extreme changes in their surroundings. So this is a part of the ocean that's kind of always keeps them on their toes. And competition among organisms in this rocky area often leads to what's called a zonation, or the prominent arrangement of organisms in a particular habitat in horizontal bands. So since these organisms are constantly competing with one another, they kind of know where they need to be, and they all take to one specific area, and we can actually see the specific area that they're in because they stay in horizontal bands. So our next area is the coastal ocean, and the coastal ocean will extend from the low tide mark to the outer edge of the continental shelf. And the continental shelf is just kind of a drop off there to kind of go down into the deepest parts of the ocean. And it falls within the photozone, and therefore photosynthesis occurs throughout this step. And the coastal ocean is often rich in plankton and many other organisms as well. So there's a lot of light here, a lot of life occurring in the coastal ocean. And one thing that occurs in this coastal ocean are what are known as kelp forests, and they're known for their dominant organism, which is a giant brown algae. So a kelp is just not actually a plant, it's a form of algae. And kelp forests are one of the most productive coastal ocean communities, so therefore they'll support a very complex food web. So there's a lot of organisms living in these kelp forests. And another important area falls under the coastal ocean are coral reefs. And these are also found again in coastal waters, and they're named for coral animals whose calcium carbonate skeletons make up their primary structure. So if you didn't know that, coral is actually an animal. If you take Bio 2, you'll learn more about those. And then therefore there's going to be an extraordinary diversity of organisms that flourish among coral reefs. So if you've ever been scuba diving or snorkeling on a coral reef, you've seen this firsthand. And then these reef-building corals will grow with the help of algae that live symbiotically within their tissue. So remember, symbiosis, relationship with two organisms live closely together. So corals and algae live together, and they actually make a very thriving community. So our next area of the ocean is the open ocean, or another name for that is the oceanic zone, and extends from the edge of the continental shelf outward. And this is our largest marine zone. And most of the photosynthetic activity on Earth occurs in this photic zone, and then occurs in the photic zone in the open ocean by the smallest of producers. So the open ocean is basically the largest part of the ocean where most of the life is going to occur, and that's photosynthesizers, are producers, as well as going to be some upper level consumers as well, because there's fishes that are all shapes and sizes that dominate the open ocean. And there's marine mammals that live there as well, but they must stay close to the surface to breathe. So marine mammals be things like whales, seals, things like that. And so the open ocean is going to be dominated by, again, these variety of organisms. So for our next zone, our final zone, is called the benthic zone. And this is going to be the ocean floor because it contains organisms that live attached or near the bottom. So the benthic zone means attached to the bottom. And these organisms are therefore called benthos, and therefore kind of going along with the benthic zone, saying that the ocean floor is called the benthic zone. And this zone extends horizontally along the ocean floor from the coastal ocean through the open ocean. So it basically is the complete bottom of the ocean except for kind of right along the edge. And then the benthic ecosystems often depend on food from organisms that grow in the photic zone. So even though they live down at the bottom, they need the food from the organisms from up top. And then chemosynthetic primary producers support life without light near the deep sea vents, so they can use the energy created by those deep sea vents. They do not have to use the light. So that's it for chapter 4. Let me know if you have any questions.